Hey, welcome back to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. Happy to have you with us once again. Again, we do politics for the culture, politics for us, by us. We're always talking about a myriad of different topics about small p politics. So we're not talking to you just traditional politicians. We're talking to folks who have levels of political influence, levels of political sway at every facet and every spectrum of this thing that we call politics. You're going to see me for the next couple episodes because I'm a bit of a blur. That is a black nerd, if you do not know. I'm excited about revisiting Wakanda November 11th. And so my lapel pin is going to reflect that. Going to be wearing my Black Panther lapel pin for the next couple episodes to make sure that we're all ready to return back to Wakanda in November. And looking forward to Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever. Shameless plug. I'm just a blurb, so don't blame me. Today's episode is going to be an important one because we're going to be talking a little bit about the Department of State. Now, a lot of folks see or heard about secretaries of state. They're appointed by the president of the United States, but we don't think about the thousands of American citizens that are working across the globe in different countries in different spaces. Sprinkled in that, and a very small percentage, unfortunately, are Black foreign service officers who are out here representing folks on two fronts, representing both the American government, but at the same time, Black America. We know Black music, Black movies, Black culture has gone global. So these folks become de facto ambassadors for the culture, whether they like it or not. And so we're blessed to have a friend of the show and a friend of mine joining us today, Ms. Nia Jackson, who is a foreign service officer with the United States Department of State. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what it's like to be Black globally. Thank you for coming to the show today, Nia.
Thank you, Dwight. I always call you Bullard, but thank you, Dwight, for having me on today. It is a pleasure to talk about Black representation in the Foreign Service. Do you want me to start with a little bit of my bio, or how do you want to jump into it?
Well, no, we're just going to really just kind of jump into the conversation. So we're happy to have you here, happy to have you on the show. I mean, as I talked about in the intro, this concept of foreign service is oftentimes foreign to Black people, right? We talk about the fact that the foreign service and foreign service officers in particular do not reflect even the percentage of Black people in the United States. Black people in the United States represent about 13% of the overall population, but well less than 5% of Black folks in the foreign service. And so,
yes, it's actually at an astonishing now. I just looked at the numbers before the show, 3.16%. So that's actually down from 2014 when it was around 4%. But so about 82% of current episodes are European Americans. Yes, but Black representation in foreign service is incredibly important. For those that I'm not sure how familiar people are with the foreign service, people typically know it as the term U.S. diplomat. And so the U.S. diplomats, it's composed of like five job cones. So there's economics and political cone, which people typically consider a diplomat who work with foreign governments directly, or personnel and officials of foreign governments directly. There's management officers that control the insides and the running and the smooth functioning of an embassy. There's consular officers who issue visas, support American citizens abroad, help with immigration abroad as well. And then there are PD, public diplomacy officers, which I'm a public diplomacy cone officer, and we work with communications, education, and cultural exchange. And
definitely appreciate that input. Kind of want to really kind of jump into, why we need more people who look like you and I as kind of, ambassadors or, greater representation of kind of Black people in this country. As you mentioned, under 4% of all foreign service officers happen to be Black. Why is it important to have Black people kind of in those spaces?
Well, it's important to have a foreign service force that represents the American people, right? And so we're well under the 14% of Black Americans in the foreign service. It's incredibly important for several reasons. It's important for several reasons. One, as from my experience as a Black foreign service officer, I've been able to relate to foreign publics abroad in a way that sometimes my non-Black colleagues can't. My tour before Brazil, I was in Sudan, and being a Black officer came with some pros and cons. One, I was invited to more personal events, to homes and weddings where you actually get the real meat of the country and the real understanding of what's going on in the country, because I was Black, and people felt a little bit more comfortable expressing things to me or being a little bit more honest with me on the sidelines. On the flip side to that, though, being a Black foreign service officer, sometimes I would go to official meetings representing the United States government, and I've been questioned on, where's the American? Did the US government not send me an American? And so that has its problems. And so one thing that's actually been very shocking to me working abroad is a lack of understanding about the context of Black American identity, Black American history. Going to Sudan, I had this idea, the universal Black consciousness myth, right? And as a Black foreign service officer, you learn that other populations, particularly in Black countries, there's the country is not seen. Some people don't see themselves as Black, especially if they've never left the country. It's divided on class, tribe, education level, skin color, part of the country that you're in. And so being abroad as a Black officer, I even learned to open up my awareness of what the spectrum of Blackness looks like, how it's perceived in other countries by other people, and how I have to negotiate my space in those areas.
No doubt, no doubt. That's tremendous insight. And so, you talk about this notion of the spectrum of Blackness. Like for you, like what's it like to kind of discover this notion of global Blackness, right? Like to like walk into spaces as this Black identifying person from an American experience.
Yeah.
You've had a unique experience because you've been in both continental Africa as well as Black South America, right? And so what was it, culture shock? Was it shock and awe?
Yes, it's actually very, very, very shocking. I once had one of my drivers there when I was in Sudan. We were in the car, and he's just like, look at that Black person across the, and I'm like, but you're Black. And he's like, no, I'm not Black. I'm Arab, and was very offended by this idea of Blackness. And what I came to learn there, that the notion and affinity to Blackness actually centers on like age lines. Like people that are above the age of 40 tend to, if they're dark skinned but have light, like wavy hair, they're like, no, I'm Arab. Or if they're, and this is the way that unfortunately, this is the way that they grew up under British rule, and under their parents' association with British rule and attachment to whiteness. And fortunately, the younger generations, at least in the context of Sudan, are a bit more awakened. So even people who may phenotypically look Arab will now identify as an African. So this was very shocking when I got to Sudan, when they're like, no, I'm not African, I'm Arab. And so that was a unique, shocking experience. Also, my last post was in Brazil. And again, it's on a lot of times color lines or ethnic lines, where, a lot of my friends were lighter skinned Black, and then not practitioners of candomblé, but Catholics, a lot of them confided in me that they didn't know they were Black till college, which is crazy. Or, and like, it's a crazy conception because of how, Brazil took the opposite approach in terms of creating a stratification of like a racial class system in the country. Like the US, it was banned for Black and white people to marry, to integrate. Brazil had a strategy of integration and like eradication of culture through assimilation and integration. And so there's even charts, and there's a symbol in Brazil called Mãe Preta, with this Black woman and a white baby sucking on the nipple. And there's charts to show like how you can reduce Black out of your color line, where in the United States, we have the 1-drop rule, right? But in Brazil, it's if you have 1 drop white, you're no longer Black, and let's reduce the Black blood out of the population. So the conception of race and identity is really interesting. And even now in Brazil, it's really cool. I was just there There's now November. Actually, we're coming into November. It's October now. Called Negro. It's Black Consciousness Month. And Black Consciousness Day in November. So they're not even in the place where it's like, oh, Black History Month. It's Black Consciousness Month. And it was amazing last year to see all the programming around raising Black culture, which a lot of the events that I went to, stem from American Black culture. So Black Bailey, there's this thing called Black Bailey Boom, or it's called Bailey Charmy, which is almost like a electric slide on 1,000. So every song has its own dance moves and everyone dances together. It's amazing. And a lot of the music is American music from the hip hop and R&B from the 90s and 2000s.
The ultimate swag surf.
It really is the ultimate swag surf. And it's a workout.
I love it. Well, speaking of Black culture, one of the underperforming groups, unfortunately, when it comes to getting passports, is Black Americans, right? I saw a study recently that looked at people when they acquired their first passport, broken down by demographic groups, and it said that Black Americans tend to not get their first passport till after the age of 30, right?
Oh, wow.
And so we're talking about, of course, this is becoming kind of less and less common, where we're seeing more folks traveling abroad. But I think too often we have Black Americans that kind of get stuck in a bucket, right? It's like, let me go to the Caribbean, let me go to Tulum, Mexico.
Yes.
Let me maybe get to Abu Dhabi, but it kind of stops there, right?
Yes.
What is it, what would you kind of tell the Black community about why it's important to A, get a passport, B, to travel, and then C, to travel broadly, right? To really explore some of these places that are a little less common for our people.
Yes, I agree. There's just so much richness of culture abroad, and that's one of my favorite things about traveling, that you don't get to see in a textbook, or get to see these nuances. And a lot of my friends are like, yeah, Tulum or Caribbean. And I'm like, why? It's wonderful to me. Honestly, the best, we talk about costs often in the conversation around travel. To me, traveling in the Caribbean is actually quite expensive. You think about hotels and attractions and services. But if you go abroad, the most expensive thing is the flight. And if you buy early enough, you could get a cheap flight. And accommodations abroad, like Thailand, is super duper affordable. Like I went on like an 8 island tour, including lunch and breakfast, for like $37. When in the US that would be like $200 and some odd dollars, or in the Caribbean it'd be like $200 and some odd dollars. And so that's one aspect. Is cost is a great reason to travel abroad. To me, in the full picture, it's actually cheaper if you go a little bit farther and go to some places that are not as well known. Also, you broaden your perspective of yourself. So one of my favorite trips of all time was going to Accra, Ghana. I don't know if you did the year return or gone to Ghana and gone to the slave castles there. And it's this feeling and this connection that I think us as Black Americans, sometimes we never got to experience. Like, where did we come from, or what is the last thing our ancestors saw? It's this thing that's so far away oftentimes. And so it gives place. I know that probably have some veteran listeners. I went to Vietnam, and my uncle was a Vietnam veteran who swears he'll never go back to Vietnam, but it was an important experience for me to see what it looked like there, and to also go to Laos, where I went to some bomb removal sites. Like, I did a volunteer service and went to remove like the shrapnel and the bombies that haven't exploded, that's caused like paralysis in people, and to see the sites, that effects of war abroad, the effects of things that U.S. foreign policy abroad, or effects of disasters abroad, and to actually understand it and internalize it within self.
Now, listeners, to lose the point that you just made, when you're talking about bomb removal, you're talking about from the Vietnam era, like bombs that were still left over from 1968, 69, 70, 71.
Yes.
That are yet to be exploded and are still there. And that, you have countries that are actively trying to remove the kind of residue, residual leftovers from American intervention in those spaces. So I didn't want people to lose that point, thinking that it was some sort of new war. We're talking about 50, 60-year-old relics of war that are still causing danger and harm to those countries.
Yeah, and so what you learn from travel is that the past is what's the phrase? The past is not even past; it's still present. And I think that greater sense of knowledge helps, I don't know, orientate you in this way. And then professionally, and that's from a personal point of view. And then from a professional point of view, I've learned to work with people of diverse orientation across different points of intersectionality and memory and understanding. And so it's just broadened my ability to be a professional in the 21st century, and to communicate with others even back home. Like, so for instance, I love going back home, and I have an Uber driver from Morocco where I studied abroad as well. And then I could greet them, and they get so excited. They feel so warm. Or, if you're doing volunteer sites at shelters, and like you can connect with them in the language. I always love to, whether I know the language fully fluently or just learn a few words, to connecting people even back home in the United States is something that I cherish so much from my experiences abroad.
Absolutely, love to hear it. And now it's like you're thinking about, when we think about foreign service
Mhm.
officers and we think about kind of like the global economy, right?
Mhm.
Is there any advice you give to someone who's like looking to work for, a Nike or a Google or one of
Mhm.
these other companies, but it says that this requires, extensive travel, or you may have to be stationed or live
Mhm.
in another country. For a Black person, could you give some advice on why they should really consider applying for that, as opposed to being reluctant about
Mhm.
leaving the country?
Yeah, I mean, why? I mean, travel. I mean, why you should do it? You learn so much, and when you're embedded in culture, it's a very different experience. Like for me, traveling has been a very different experience than my other friends who maybe travel for like 4 days or like 5 days, because in the U.S. it's so hard to get off. But living and being embedded in a country, you learn a granulity that you won't get just by going to a resort in Cancun. You 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 find some, especially when you're there for holidays, right? When you're there for holidays, I feel like you truly get an understanding of the warmth of a people. It runs your horizons, reduces any or eliminates any stereotypes you may have had against what you've received from the media. So for instance, when I served as an intern in the embassy in Argentina, I remember I was doing a pre-departure orientation for what they were science students anyways. And they were like, we have a question for you. They were going to go study at university in the US. And I was like, okay, thinking about, partying or something like that, because I'm young. I was the youngest member on the team. And they were like, okay, can you snap your fingers and shake your head and say, oh no, you didn't? And in that moment I wanted to snap my fingers and shake my eyes and say, no, I didn't. But it allowed me the opportunity to explain that. And they're like, I was like, where'd you get? They're like, no, that's what you do on TV and all the movies. That's what you do. And
Wow.
so, even for people abroad, it's important for them to experience Black Americans abroad, to show that these stereotypes are not true and real, or they might be. And I explained it to him. I was like, you have a different communication pattern when you talk to your grandparents versus your friends, right? And I was like, there's different communication nuances in African American speech and dialect, but do not do that again in the United States. But it was a good way to help break that stereotype right then and there, or their preconceptions of Black Americans while they were still based in their home country.
Yeah. Well, listen, you've given us a wealth of knowledge. There, we are politics for the culture, so I do have a
Mhm.
couple playful questions for you. But before
Okay.
I get into those, I want to make sure you drop. I know you had a few resources you wanted to share
Mhm.
to kind of help people, get an understanding of either foreign service work or things they need to know. So feel free to drop those websites, and we'll make
Yes.
sure that folks get that information as they're watching.
Okay, well, perfect. So I'm going to do a quick run through. I'm a Charles B. Rango Fellow, so I was able to get my graduate school education for free and had a great network and support system. So if you're interested in the foreign service, I recommend that you guys apply to the Charles B. Rango International Affairs Program or the Pickering. Those applications are unfortunately closed for the year, but put them on your calendar for next August. But there's some that are open, are the critical language scholarship program. So whether you are undergraduate, graduate, PhD program, you can enroll in CLS, which will teach you a critical language. So they have, I think, 13 languages or more, from Japanese, Arabic, Chinese, they even now have Swahili. And it is an amazing program. I did this program in Morocco, fully paid for, and you get a tuition. It's an incredible immersive experience that I will never forget. If you're interested in development through USAID, the Payne Fellowship is available. It's similar to Wrangell and Pickering, but with USAID, and that closes November 4th. So that is still open. CLS is open until November 15th. And then a few others to check out, Fulbright, Gilman, and Rhodes. And Dwight, if you have, I could put the links in your show notes. I'll send that to you on the website.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look forward to getting those, and folks will get a chance to see and those websites. Mm-hmm. But again, I mentioned we're politics for the culture, so we got to talk a little bit about the culture, right? Okay. So, you've had the honor of being in a number of different cultures, different countries abroad. When we talk about the notion of global Black music, I was actually at a party recently, and the DJ was calling folks out that said, if you've been listening to WizKid for 5 years, make some noise. For those of you who just learned about WizKid when Essence came out, be quiet, right? And so oftentimes we think about Afro beats and Black music. We know that these artists are really putting in the work in these countries. So the question is, are there some artists that you discovered while you were abroad that you want folks to know about before they blow up and become popular? So maybe a top 3, top 5 list of folks you listen to in other countries that you think deserve a little shine, as people Google these musicians.
Okay, yes. So Mamin in Sudan, I love him. He's dope. There's a thing called like the 249 boys, 249 dope. Gaia, she's also Sudanese, but she's based out of, I believe, Sweden. I hope that's not wrong. But Gia, Mamin. In Brazil, their names are kind of, to me, they're large because in Brazil they're huge, but I think people don't know them here. Ludmilla, she's amazing. Isa, she just had a song with Sierra that just came out. People should now know Anita as well. Gilson's one of my favorite bands in Brazil. Brazil has one of the best selections of music that I've ever seen. Like the genres, there's just so many diverse genres in Brazil. So yeah, check those out. They're great.
Now, I also know that you're a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and I'm curious. You're in these countries. Where's the weirdest place you've heard another Delta call out and then prompted a response from you? If you have a story about encountering one of your sorors in one of these often distant places.
Well, we're everywhere. But definitely when I was in South Korea, I ran into a few Deltas. There's a military base there. So there's actually a vibrant Greek life there in South Korea, believe it or not. But then in Brazil, I was super lucky to have like 3 sorors with me in Rio. So we were all across Rio. But I can't, obviously, yeah, I mean, everywhere. Ghana, yeah, everywhere. I went to a wedding in Sudan. We were all like, there was like 5 people that were part of different Greek organizations.
I love it. Nia, I can't thank you enough for joining us today on Politics for the Culture. I really, I think, you've enlightened me just in the midst of your travels and the things that you've been able to experience. I'm super happy to be able to call you a friend and now a friend of the show.
Yes.
Any kind of parting words, parting advice you want to share with folks on why or just based on your experience, or even if you have some Portuguese you want to drop on us on a jewel somebody share with you in your last tour in Brazil. Any parting comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I do want to make one point. It's not a light comment, so I wish I included it earlier in the conversation. But as one of the most important things for me as a Black Foreign Service officer is to speak up and speak out and to be that voice in the room. I've been given this incredible opportunity to be in this service to represent America. And one of the most poignant moments I've had in the Foreign Service was I was after the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. and being able to counsel senior leadership who I was a first tour diplomat, 20-year diplomat, could not speak to what was going on in the United States, or our senior level officers. And this was something that I think hurt me as a young officer. But I think we're growing as a department and growing as a people. But to be able to speak out and to give points and to give some context and to counsel, and then also to create public programming around these issues that were going on in the United States, because people abroad want to know. People are inspired by Americans abroad. And so when things happen in the United States, people try to make sense of it abroad and in their own communities. And so I've been very blessed to have the opportunity to speak out, give input, and really represent, because that's what we're here for, to have our voice at the table, to be a part of the table, and to make it up our own way and to jazz it up and make it more exciting.
I love it. Thank you again, Mia Jackson, for being here. Thank you for, spreading love across the world, but sharing knowledge here. And we hope that that number definitely increases thanks to your input today, that folks will find their way into foreign service. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, guys.